October 26th. So I'm going to open the public hearing. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Board of Appeal. My name is Frank O'Brien, and I'll be acting as the chair of this hearing. Joining me are my fellow board members, Nicholas Gray and Jeffrey Mullen. This is the continuation of the proceeding regarding the comprehensive permit under application of the provisions of Chapter 40B of the general laws relative to the premises located at 936 Brush Hill Road. Just as a reminder for the members of the public and other stakeholders, we are in that portion of the public hearing where the board is engaged in deliberations. Pursuant to the provisions of the state's open meeting law, these deliberations are done in public. No comments will be received from members of the general public. However, the board may avail itself of various experts, and we will see some of those who will join us. I expect that the board's 40B consultant, Judy Barrett, will be joining us at the bottom of the hour. The town's planning director, Mr. Sawinski, is also joining us as well. The board may from time to time ask experts or others for comments relative to specific issues, but no public comments or testimony will be taken unless, of course, it is pursuant to a specific question asked by the board. This evening's festivities, if you will begin with the board taking a look at the extensive list of waivers from various portions of the town's bylaws, primarily the zoning board. There is roughly a 6-page summary of the requested waivers, which were the latest version of which were filed, I believe, yes, it's dated September 8th, 2022. And I will be sharing my screen with the members of the board in just a few moments so that we can all see the document that we'll be working from. So my goal, my hope this evening is that we will be able to go through the list of requested waivers. If it is the board's pleasure at that particular point in time, I'd like to get a preliminary opinion from members of the board relative to those waivers. And then I'd like to begin a discussion of what additional conditions the board may wish to pursue relative to this project. But the first order of business will be the list of requested waivers. Having said that, I must, at this point in time, somewhat red-facedly confess that I went to law school, not to math school, and consequently, I have difficulty counting. And I miscounted the 40-day deadline, and I have been reminded that under the provisions of 40B's rules and regulations that the deadline for the issuance of the decision in this case is November 8th. I had preliminarily said it was November 17th, but I believe I failed to count the Sundays in the time frame. So the preliminary, so the deadline under the 40-day rule for this decision is November 8th. It's my sincere hope that the board will be able to make that decision, but I think that we will possibly revisit that at the end of the evening as we see how much progress we have made. I'm also mindful that the members of the board also have other professional obligations, but I think that the board is making good progress, and we certainly want to extend every effort for all of the parties concerned to complete this exercise in an as expeditious a manner and as a complete a manner as possible. So with that, again, the plan for this evening is waivers. and then we'll have a least initial discussion concerning various other conditions. But at this point in time, I'd like to ask if either Mr. Mullen or Mr. Gray have any initial comments.
No. No comments.
All right, so at this point, I am going to share my screen. Crystal, I'm getting the disabled participant screen sharing message.
Yeah, I'm unsure why we went through this last time because everyone has sharing privileges. Hold on just a second. Okay, try now.
Here we go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right, can everybody see the doc?
Yes.
I am getting, thank you. So again, this is the waiver document. I believe it was provided to us by the applicant, and we've had at least, I believe, 2 discussions concerning it. This is as you can see, this is dated September 8th, 2022, and it's the revised document. And so what I'd like to try to do is I'd like to go through these individually, and most of these. So for members of the public, one of the things that differentiates a 40B proceeding in general, certainly a 40B proceeding in front of the Board of Appeals, is that, and as the name applies with the term comprehensive, it's basically one-stop shopping, if you will, in the vernacular, at the 10,000-foot level. And part of what happens during the 40B process is a review of different requirements. And what this board's practice has been in the past and will continue to be for this hearing is to review the requested waivers and make a decision regarding whether they will indeed be waived or in their entirely, in part, or will be waived with certain additional requirements. So that is what is going to go on now. So with the first one, it is a proposed waiver of Chapter 6, Section 33, which is a bylaw which requires a permit from the Select Board for curb cuts and street and sidewalk openings. This is something that is, of course, during the course of construction, and it is my experience that this particular request is fairly standard. And what I would suggest to the board is that this waiver be approved as to town ways, of course, which this 40B proposal, this 40B application concerns, and that notice and approval of the DPW director be a condition of any work on a town way. That is consistent with prior requests. Does any member of the board have any comment relative to that?
I agree with that. I think to the extent that we're going to replicate this in the decision, I would strike the word permitting in the last line, be subject to compliance with any state requirements, whatever they are. I don't know what they are, but it should say that. And then my only other comment, other than agreeing with what you said, Frank, is, isn't there only one curb cut?
Yes. Yes, that's my understanding. There's one curb cut. It's an existing,
Yeah,
I believe it's an existing curb cut.
I think it's being modified slightly, but perhaps not, but it should be a singular. It says locations. And to be clear, it's not just notice. You said notice and approval of the DPW director. I think that's important. I mean, there's a public safety issue there.
Yes, notice and approval of the
Yeah.
DPW director as a condition of any work.
Yeah.
The
I
next,
agree with both with the allowance of the waiver as modified and with the making it subject to the notice and approval of the DPW director.
all right. The next one is a waiver to chapter 10, section 3A and B, which would authorize the principal uses enumerated at sections 3A A1 to 3A10 and the accessory uses enumerated in 3B1 and 3B3 inclusive. And this waiver sought for this section to authorize the principal use of property for multifamily residential use, 20 units. This is also a waiver which has been sought and granted in other 40B cases. And I would suggest that this waiver be approved. Does any
No.
member have any questions or comments regarding that?
No objection.
No objection. If we don't approve the waiver, the project can't be built as planned.
Okay. Let's move on to the chapter 10, section 3B3, which deals with signs and billboards. The applicant proposes a waiver of this particular section in its entirety, so as to permit any and all project signage, and there suggests that there are certain limitations. Basically, in this case, because there's only one building, I would suggest it's site directional advisory signs and things like that. The board in other 40B cases has approved such a waiver with the signage to be consistent with permit requirements. Now, we have to be, signs are a touchy subject in Milton, and they're highly regulated. So we may need to spend a moment or two on this particular one. Any comments regarding sign requirements?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the broadness of the waiver as written. I think you're correct that the town is particularly sensitive to signs in general. And that a broad waiver to waive it, the requirements in its entirety, it's just overly broad. That's what I'm trying to say. For example, the way it's written, I don't think there would be anything prohibiting the applicant, for example, from putting some kind of very bright lit LED sign on the sign of the building. I mean, there's nothing denying that. I'm not saying that they would, they'd be foolish to do so, but I think we should modify the language to make it more limited and as to what the signs can be, since this is, if we grant this, it's the sole bite at the apple, I guess, in terms of regulating the sign.
Thank you.
I'd say two things. I think there needs to be a condition that the signs need to be consistent with the character of the neighborhood,
Absolutely.
or something to the effect of similarly situated signs in the neighborhood. Perhaps that's better, or both. It's only a few places in this area where there is the need for such signs, right? So I think you want to get the idea that the signs have to be in the character of the neighborhood. But I also think the planning director should approve them. I recall, I think in the other case, Frank, that you were referring to, I think we saw signage up there on Blue Hill Avenue. I don't know that I'm familiar with the signage that's being proposed, and it says here designed to be determined. I don't have a problem with that, and the board hasn't consistently not really wanted to get into too much design review, but the planning director should approve it.
I would agree with that, and I do recall now that at least in one other 40B case that I believe we did see graphics or a rendering of the proposed sign.
Right. It was right out on the street there,
Right, and I would also, for the record, note that being restrictive relative to signage in this community is something that is of general applicability. I just finished writing a decision on a building, actually coincidentally with a Brush Hill Road address, where the board voted to deny our requested sign and limited the applicant to fairly modest directional signs that would identify the location and the address. And certainly that would be, I think, tasteful, modest, in keeping with the neighborhood, those sorts of things. I like the idea of the planning director having the ability to sign off. The question, I just want to ask, is the planning director the right person, or is it the building commissioner who would be the right person?
Well, I know the planning director's on the call. He also has a better title than the one we're using. I've forgotten what it is, so I apologize to him for suggesting that. But
Well, why don't we ask Mr. Sawinski?
Yeah.
Mr. Sawinski.
I think between myself or the building commissioner, it strikes me as kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think we each have a different role in the sign review process. So, it really is your pick. I think relative to kind of the nature of the condition that you're speaking about, it is true that there aren't a ton of examples in the residential zones, in particular, but you do have, Woodmere up the street, which does have a kind of an identifying monument sign.
yeah,
And then, I know that we're trying to kind of steer away from the kind of the institutional comparison, but Curry College and their signage is kind of the other example. I think the difference between this example of this waiver and previous ones, and I think we've been talking about the Blue Hill Ave project, is, we did have an opportunity during the public hearing to discuss signage a little bit, which I don't think necessarily came up too much in this one. And so I think we had a little bit more input from the applicant as to kind of their comfort with various conditions. It is the same applicant on this one, so you can do with that information what you want. But I think there's a little bit of wiggle room here, but also, obviously, you don't want to go too far with conditioning these waivers.
Yeah, you know what, Mr. Sawinski, if you, no objection, I'm not adverse to designating that you as planning director or as the person would sign off on this. So,
That's fine.
okay.
How do my fellow board members feel about this monument at the entrance being illuminated? I can make arguments on both sides of that, and I'm curious what you guys think.
I personally am troubled with the word monument. Because a derivative is the word monumental, and monumental is big, and I think that we would like to steer away from big so that it's in relative keeping with the neighborhood. So that would be my initial. I think I'd like to take a shot at drafting some language for this particular section.
That would be great.
I actually like the fact that it's illuminated. If we have design review approval, if we have approval of it,
Yeah.
I mean, planning director will make sure it's appropriately illuminated, but that strikes me as a good thing in this location.
I think my recollection of driving on Brush Hill Road in the dark, as we're entering this dark time of year, especially, well, it doesn't matter, it's dark when it's dark, but that it's not a super well lit road, and there's an argument for the sign to be illuminated to help direct people to the right location so that they're not missing it and having to turn around in a strange place, add to the traffic volume, if you will, because they're turning around and going back. So I think it makes sense on balance for it to be, illuminated enough to be able to for people to see it, but not to stand out, if that makes any sense at all. I just enough to help with direction, but not call monumental attention to itself. It's sort of what I'm thinking, but I think your idea, Mr. O'Brien, to revise that language is good.
Just to be crystal clear with the members, because the words sound similar, I want to clarify that we're talking about illuminated as in lit up, as opposed to eliminated as meaning removed, not in there. So we're talking about a sign
Lighting up.
that has lighting.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And I do know, I mean, I believe, having passed it enough times, that the development on Canton Avenue is at Wolcott Woods. Am I getting that correct? Up there at the far western end of Canton Avenue does have a stone wall with a sign to identify the development. I don't know whether it's lit, but that type of, that stretch of Canton Avenue and Brush Hill Road have some certain similarities in terms of their look and feel, and that would seem to be a good example of what a sign in this location might look like, maybe just for a reference.
All right. I also want to be mindful of the concerns expressed, particularly by the abutter across the street, relative to some other lighting issues associated with this. So I want to be
Yeah.
mindful of that as well.
And I don't know whether this is getting, maybe, and Mr. Zawinski can tell us if it's too far down into the design weeds, but it seems to me that a sign that is lit up from, rather than having light proceeding forth from it, might be less, might do the job without impacting the neighbors as much, right? If you put a.
Yeah, I think especially on something like this where, I think we can all kind of imagine the type of sign that the applicant is going for. We obviously don't know for absolute certain, but I think, you can put some preferential type language, in this. a lot of these signs are lit by lamps on the ground,
Yeah.
sort of shooting up onto the
Exactly.
sign. I think, given the concerns that we've heard on some other lighting issues on this project, both from the building and from vehicles, I think it's appropriate to sort of put in some language about, that lighting not casting glare onto the street or onto, abutting properties, appropriately shielding those lights. I think, I don't know if you can require this because it does get into sort of a design standard rather than a guideline or a suggestion. But, if it's at all possible to kind of light that sign, downward as opposed to upward, we kind of like to see that. It's not always in the cards when it comes to these types of signs, but I think there are ways to put in language that isn't restrictive, but is rather more kind of suggestive of what the board is interested in. That kind of gives the applicant leeway and also kind of gives me as the planning director a little bit of guidance as to like, okay, when I eventually have to sign off on this, is it achieving the goals of the permit?
Okay,
I agree with all that.
I think that we need to draft something that provides some guardrails, but gives both the applicant and the planning director some flexibility so as to craft something that stays within those guardrails.
And to the to the extent there's any confusion about what an illuminated sign is, maybe we just get away from that language. You could say a sign that is lit externally or something like that. I wouldn't read. I was thinking of the sign that has lights in it would be like a backlit sign. That's not what we're talking about. So, Frank, if on the language, you might want to make that kind of an edit too.
Well, I mean, I don't want to. I think at least in the draft, I don't want to, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that the applicant would do this. That could be read in such a way as to suggest that a bright neon sign would meet the standards.
Right.
I get it. So, all right, good discussion. Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Mr. Sawinski, thank you. I may lean on some of your technical expertise on this issue.
I'm ready for it.
All right. Moving on. The next one is earth materials removal and fill. Again, this project is going to require some earth removal, the installation of various walls, etc. So digging and other construction related activity will be taking place. The language here in the far right section, waiver sought for this section in its entirety rather, is consistent with waivers granted by the board. Actually, I believe it's exactly the same as the language contained in waivers granted by the board in previous 40Bs that involve a need for fill or cutting or other similar activities. Does anyone have any questions or comments relative to this particular waiver?
No objection. This will be addressed in the submittals part of the decision.
Yes.
No, I'm fine.
So I believe Ms. Barrett has joined us. Judy, are you able to hear us?
So I can hear you, Frank. I'm driving, so I'm probably going to stay on mute unless you ask me a specific question. As soon as I get home, I'll shut off on the phone and I'll join on my computer.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. We will endeavor to keep you safe on the highway. So
I'm
thank you for-
fine. Thank you.
for joining us.
Yep, no problem.
So I'm going to move on to the next page on the waiver list here. And The next one is the dimensional regulations, chapter 10, section 6. Now, I've looked at this very briefly. It had, clearly we'll have to, obviously, I can't be trusted with numbers, obviously, given the mistake I made on the date. But this looks correct, correct to me. Mr. Sawinski, perhaps on this particular one, we can make sure that all of the numbers are double and triple checked. Maybe we could ask you to do that. Again, this particular one is consistent. Well, if this waiver isn't granted, the project can't be built. So, to borrow Mr. Gray's words from earlier in the hearing. So, are there any questions or comments from members of the board relative to this particular waiver request?
No objection.
No objection is, I'm glad we're checking the numbers. I think that's right.
Next one, 10, 6A1. This is not more well, again, another one that would need to be waived in order to allow the project to be built as proposed. So this would authorize the 20 dwelling units in one building on a single lot, which is consistent with the plans for the project now. This language is also consistent with language in previous 40B decisions for multi-unit developments. Any questions or comments from members of the board relative to this particular waiver?
No comments.
No comment.
All right, I think that one is going to be approved. Moving on to the next page. So this is waivers regarding the provisions of the zoning bylaw, Roman numeral 6, and in the C's, buildings and side yards. This one, the applicant has suggested that the waiver is being sought, or has articulated the waiver is being sought query for members of the board if the requested waiver is a little broad, or if the board is it's not inconsistent with other such waivers that the board has granted in other cases.
No objection here.
No objection. I think it's necessary to carry out the project as designed, if it's approved.
Right. Um, 10D is another dimensional, if you will, related bylaw, and is also necessary for the building to be constructed in its plan, the proposed plan form. So again, I think it's consistent with the one that we just suggested we had no objections to. So are there any objections to this particular requested waiver?
No,
No,
Okay. All right, this one deals with parking regulations. Um, The numbers are consistent with what is contained within the plans. The and is consistent with similar language from other 40B projects that have been considered in the town. Do the members have any questions or comments regarding this language?
was there any testimony, I just don't recall, on the number of units each, number of parking spaces each unit would be able to have that go with the unit? So I know there was testimony from the neighbors that the site is underparked. I also know there's no on-street parking. So that it could potentially be a parking problem if if you're thinking about guest parking, the need for parking for Uber and Amazon, etc. Handicap parking, of course. It could potentially be we could be creating a underparking problem. Unless one way to address that would be to limit the number of parking spaces that would be offered to each unit. I don't think we had testimony on that. That was a huge issue in East Milton.
yes, it was, but the average number per unit in this development is higher than East Milton, as I recall.
Agreed. Yeah, no, that's true, Nick. No question about
But
that.
there is, as you correctly state, there's no alternative.
Yeah.
As there, might be for guest parking, for example, off-street in East Milton. Yeah, I
Could
don't know.
require a parking plan to be submitted as part of the plans to be approved by the town. That would be that would be consistent with the expectation regarding the uses of 35 parking spaces once you accommodate users, guests, visitors. I guess guests and visitors are the same. Users, guests, vendors, and handicap spaces that need to be set aside. Something like that.
So I agree with that. I think that I don't have an objection to the parking regulations being waived. Right?
Yeah, I
This
agree.
is saying that they're being waived and we're gonna waived in accordance with how we put it into the permit itself. So perhaps when we're writing the conditions for the permit, we can go back and refresh our recollections as to the actual testimony about whether they were going to assign each unit one space and leave the rest up for other purposes. I think there was some testimony along how they were going to allocate the parking, but without going back and checking notes and things, I don't recall offhand, and I could be confusing it with another project.
I know that there was conversation during the course of the hearing regarding parking issues, because I also recall that there were a number of conversations regarding the related issue of bike parking. Perhaps the way to go on this would be to waive the parking regulation in a manner somewhat similar to what has been proposed and requested, and including within it, including within the conditions, a condition requiring the development of a development submission of a parking plan.
Yeah.
Which would be subject to review and approval by the planning director. And within that, certain number of spaces would be designated for, I have to think that there are certain standards associated with parking in terms of a certain ratio of handicap spaces, as well as the need for a dedicated delivery space. Mr. Sawinski, would you care to weigh in on this issue in general?
I think that's probably fair. They're requesting a waiver of the parking requirements they've discussed, and we've talked about how many spaces are going to be in it. So, you'll be, if and when the project gets approved, they'll get the spaces they requested. I think it's reasonable to sort of have some sort of documentation, with the town for us to review about, again, what is the expectation for guest parking? What is the expectation for deliveries? I think that's just good information for us to have. And I don't think it gets you into any sort of hot water regarding, again, as with everything, you don't want to sort of dig too deep into these things, to the point that, suddenly, you're getting an appeal because they don't have the parking that they feel they need. But I do think that the concerns, raised by the board and kind of, and the concerns that were raised by kind of neighbors, I think the ratio of parking spaces is probably fine, but how those get divvied up, how the site is managed from a circulation perspective regarding, pickup and drop off and deliveries, I think is good information for us to have. So I would be okay, with that.
So I flipping through my project file and came up with a letter from Attorney Schomer dated September 6th on the parking issue, wherein he lays, I don't want to read the whole thing, it's 3 or 4 pages long, but I think he's laying out that exactly how the spaces are going to get divvied up in that letter. Day-to-day parking needs will be determined once the property's been leased. Is this helpful or not? Taking into account the need to appropriately manage parking to maximize marketability, convenience, and neighborhood impacts. Intention to require registration of all tenant vehicles. Each unit with a vehicle will be initially allocated 1 parking space. Is this what we want to hear? Which would
Yes.
result in a maximum resident use of 20 spaces, leaving 15 extra parking spaces to be allocated by management for guests, ride shares / deliveries, and additional assigned resident parking subject to availability. It is anticipated that these additional assigned parking spaces will be subject to additional parking fees and or controlled through measures such as parking pass system in order to control demand. So, I mean, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but I think that's addressing what Jeffrey was talking about in a minute ago.
I think you could do the waiver subject to compliance with the testimony and maybe reference the letter, something like that. I mean, I think that's consistent with what we've all said.
We've done that in other decisions too. Referencing specific testimony on the record.
All right, why don't I
As part of
take
a
a
condition.
shot? Why don't I take a shot at drafting that as well, with referencing a specific letter, and share that with the board.
Thank you.
Is that acceptable?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Um, Ms. Barrett, I know that you're driving, so if you have a suggestion in that area as well, that would be most welcome, too. So thank you.
So I also can draft that for you in a revision to the decision you have now. I don't expect you to have to do that unless you want to, but I understand what you're saying, and we have done this in some other decisions, so I think it's fine. However you want to do it, Mr. Chair, is fine with me.
Ms. Barrett, I'm happy to defer to you as the more experienced draftsperson.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. Any objection to continuing on?
Nope.
Oh,
Okay. Next one is chapter 10, section Roman numeral 8A, dealing with the enforcement of the bylaw and issuance of building permits. This language in the waiver language is consistent with earlier waivers granted by the board in other cases, and the waiver is relative to the zoning aspects, not the building code aspects. So any questions or comments from members of the board on that particular waiver?
no,
The next one deals with the submission of plots and plans, etc. And again, the language suggested is consistent with that, which has been approved by the board in previous cases. And I would also point out that, again, the use of the phrase reasonable conformance with project plans provides a little bit of wiggle room if needed during the course of construction. So that's also consistent with prior, well, actually consistent with all of the decisions of the board on zoning related matters.
Okay,
no objection.
that's fine.
All right. So let me get caught up here. Okay, so the next one is C, pertaining to the issuance of occupancy permits. Again, it's relative to the provisions of the bylaw concerning the various filings and whatnot. This is Roman numeral 8C, and again, this language consistent with language that's been approved by the board in prior decisions. Any objections from members of the board to this waiver?
No objection.
So is this waiver, it's not waiving the requirement of an occupancy agreement permit, correct? It's just saying that any requirement for an occupancy permit for which we've granted a waiver is waived.
It deals with, yeah, essentially, yes.
Right, I mean, because we want, obviously, we want an occupancy permit to be issued. But, so I'm not waiving the requirement for that in its entirety, I don't think, like in other sections, it talks about waiving it in its entirety. this seems to be limited to only those requirements for a permit that we've already granted a waiver on.
That is my.
Is that how you guys
understanding.
read it?
That's my understanding.
Yes,
If that's
Yeah.
the case, then it's okay with me.
Okay. Moving on to the next page. Site plan approval. Again, the requested waiver language is consistent with what has been approved by the board in similar 40B projects in the past. Are there any questions or comments from members of the board on this waiver?
no comments.
Nope.
Roman numeral 9B. This is a waiver that is requested because of the particular provisions in Chapter 40B and its related regulations. So it is also consistent with prior waivers approved by the board in other projects.
No objection.
No objection.
Roman numeral 9C. This has to do with findings in special permits. And the language again here is of similar purpose and intent of what was just also approved. Any questions or comments from members of the board relative to this particular requested waiver?
No.
No,
No questions. Thank you. Moving on to the applicant here, as this applicant has in prior hearings, sought a waiver of the provisions of the board's own rules relative to the applicable to 40B applications. These deal with filing and other technical requirements, and a waiver is sought, and the waiver and the objection regarding the fees and deposits. That language is consistent with language that has been placed before and waivers approved by the board in prior cases. Any questions or comments from the board relative to this proposed waiver?
no objection.
No objection, I guess. I mean, I suppose if we did object to his objection, then we're just liable for appeal because our objection exceeds what we can do under 40B. So I'm okay with it. It suggests
right.
maybe that the town needs to revise its regulations, but yeah.
The last proposed regulation, excuse me, last proposed waiver has to do with permitting requirements. And in the waiver requested is fairly broad. The board in prior cases has been somewhat reluctant to grant, if you will, such a blanket waiver, and has in the past partially approved this, if you will, and required the applicant to comply with all notification and licensing requirements, and specified that the waiver that is being granted is limited to obtaining the permit that would be required for this type of work if it was not a 40B related project. I don't see any reason to deviate from the board's prior practice, and I'd be interested if my fellow board members agree
I agree.
or disagree.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was troubled by the broadness of this, and I don't know that whether or not, I just don't recall whether or not we were given detailed enough information in the plans as to the proposed locations of all the utilities to be able to give the approval. Yeah. So, but the modified language is okay with me.
All right, and I would propose modifying it as it was modified in the excuse me. The
Blue
Blue
Hill
Hill Ave decision.
Sure.
So, having gone through 6 pages, what I'd like to do at this point in time is just take a few minutes, and I want to make sure that the notes that I have are consistent with the notes and recollections of the members of the board. And also, at this point, I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of who's doing what to whom in this particular document. So, so I'm going to go back to the beginning of it. So bear with me for just a moment. So relative to the first one, chapter 6, section 33, my notes show at Mr. Mullins' suggestion that this language should be made in the singular, if you will, and that additional language, which I think, and I'm going to read from the Blue Hill Ave decision. So making the waiver singular, because there's only, I believe there's one curb cut location, and that the waiver would be approved as to town ways. Notice and approval of the DPW director is a condition of any work on a town way. So, Ms. Barrett, is that a modification that you'd be comfortable with making?
Yes,
Thank you. Mr. Mullen, is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Did you remove the word permitting from state requirements? And the second to last word in what you said, Mr. O'Brien, it slipped my mind if you said it. For this project, subject to compliance with any and all state requirements. That was Mr. Mullen. Mr. Mullen made that edit.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
Can I ask one other question of you guys, which is, there's no sidewalk in this location. Does the waiver need to approve the street/sidewalk opening as shown on the project plans? there's no existing sidewalk.
Mhm.
And I don't think it matters. I just wanted to ask the question because maybe it matters. I don't want to approve more than we have to, you know?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. If there's no sidewalk, there's no approval or disapproval needed.
That's fine with me.
All right.
Now, there's one proviso to that, which is, again, my recollection on the plans, right? There was at the end of the driveway, to the, I want to say to the left side, if you're, I don't know which side, if you're facing the street, it'll be on the left side, a school bus bench or some little cutout for the bus to come to, for kids to wait at, right? I don't want to inadvertently mess that up by removing the word sidewalk, but I don't, so I'm just asking all those stupid questions.
But always say consistent with the plans. with
Yeah,
the Project plans.
that works.
Yeah, that would be the way to go.
Okay,
I think the phrase is approved plans, capital A, capital
It
P.
is. It is.
Okay. According to my notes, there were no additional changes to the waivers requested on the remainder of this page. Nor on page 2, other than double checking that all of the numbers are correct. And Mr. Sawinski, could I defer to you to double check that, make sure all those numbers are correct?
First thing tomorrow.
Thank you.
so Brian, were you gonna rework the language of the sign and billboard board?
Yeah, I'm working my way down to that one.
Oh, that was back up, I thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's on
Thank
page
you.
1. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. I should have looked at my document instead of looking at my notes. Yes, we need to rework the sign language. I had initially volunteered to take that on. I'm not sure, Judy, if you were on the call at that particular point in time or
I don't
not.
think so. I don't think I was.
So what I'd like to propose on that one is that I draft some language relative to that and share it with the board for consideration at its next meeting. I'll work with Mr. Barrett, Ms. Barrett and Mr. Sawinski on that. I think I have a sense of where the board is going, and honestly, just having done one of these in a hearing as well,
That sounds
literally
great.
the last one I wrote. So
Hmm.
let me do that.
Okay.
I don't have anything else until we get down to the parking one, which is 10.
Yeah.
7.
Right.
At the top of page 4. And there is, thank you, Mr. Gray, for pointing out the letter dated September 6th from applicant's counsel. Ms. Barrett, I think my notes show me that you would volunteer to take a look at that and craft some language relative to
You are
that
correct.
as well.
You are correct.
After that, I don't have any other changes in my notes.
Okay.
Until we get down to the very last one, where that one will be modified so as to say, well, it will be modified in a manner that's consistent with the decision on this particular type of waiver that was in the Blue Hill Road, in the
Blue Hill Ave.
Road decision.
Yeah.
Which partially approved, the applicant shall comply with all notification and licensing requirements. The waiver is limited to obtaining the required permit.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Have I missed anything, or are there any other, anything that the members of the board would like to revisit?
Nope.
No,
Just for Mr. Sawinski, or do you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Barrett, are you all set? Do you have any questions or comments?
I think I'm all set.
Okay. All right, so here's where we're at, kids. So we've done a run through of the decision. And there's some work and polishing that needs to be done to the decision
Right.
based upon the comments that were made by the members of the board at the first hearing. And I know that that work is underway.
Yep.
In terms of the waivers, I think we're 90% of the way there, if you will, with work to be done on the sign and parking, as well as the last one. But the last one is, we've got the language for the last one on the Division 2. The parking one, it sounds to me like Ms. Barrett has a concept.
Yeah.
And so the main one is just making sure that we get the sign thing down. And again, I'll take a shot at drafting some language for that for the board to consider at its next meeting. So, Ms. Barrett, as as someone who has a lot more experience in these, so we've done a first run through of the formal decision. We've done the waivers. Conditions.
Yes.
So any words of wisdom for the board relative to, let me pause before I go to Ms. Barrett. Mr. Gray, Mr. Mullen, any comments or anything you'd like to add at this particular point in time before I ask Ms. Barrett for some preliminary comments relative to conditions?
no comment.
Nope, thank you.
All right. Ms. Barrett, I'm going to ask for your technical expertise here. As I said, that the board would from time to time do. And just, I'd appreciate your overview for the board in terms of, the condition process.
Yeah. So what I need to do is finish going through the testimony that you have on record from your own consultants, because any conditions that they suggested, I will add or incorporate into a revised draft. That's probably the most important thing. I've looked back at one or two of the recordings I want to make sure I've seen the ones I probably care about the most, but if there's anything in the oral testimony that I need to pick up, I'm going to do that. But essentially, that's kind of what I need to do, is to get at what the consultants advised, what the board's discussion was around any of those peer review reports, and essentially do a redraft of the condition section based on that content. The other thing that we typically do on these, and I need to work with Tim on it, is make sure the town staff are okay with the conditions. We've typically run these by them. They get back to us pretty quickly. So as soon as I can pull these conditions together, which I'm going to do post haste because we're running out of time here, I'll share it with Tim. Tim can share. Tim, jump in if you disagree with me, but typically Tim has been running it by the building inspector and the fire chief and make sure, you know, we haven't forgotten anything from them, but any written recommendations they've already given you are going to be reflected in the revised draft. The rest of the decision is largely procedural. I mean, the jurisdictional findings and the governing law, that stuff isn't going to change. The only thing I've done is update that to reflect the most recent decision of the board in Amer Road. The procedural history, I need to integrate a little more content about what the abutters' main objections were, so that is memorialized in the decision. But to me, at this point, it's mainly about the conditions. And I think I should focus on that, because that's the most important thing. If there's going to be an appeal, it's going to be around the conditions. So I think that's what I need to focus on right now.
Okay.
And Frank,
Right.
I can send you a draft before we circulate it to everybody else, and you can at least take a look at it and tell me if you think I'm way off base or not. I mean, I certainly did that with chairs and some of the other decisions, so.
I think that would be helpful in issue spotting and in preparing for the next hearing and being efficient with the board's time.
Yes,
This is a volunteer board after all, and I do appreciate my fellow board members participating in this.
Yep.
As I do town staff and our consultants, but I want to be respectful of their time as well.
understood.
What is doable from you from a scheduling point of view then?
So I assumed I would probably swim in this decision on Saturday and get it out to you Sunday. I don't feel like I have a heavy lift here. I just need time. Without the phone ringing, without email, without anything else. I just need time. So I have all the records that are on file with the board from your 40B site on the town website. I've gone through a lot of that. There's just it's a recording I want to finish looking at. And I probably won't be able to do that until Friday, but I'm planning to turn this back to you on Sunday.
All right. So given that, it would be my recommendation that the board schedule another meeting for purposes of deliberation next week. I happen to be free every evening next week, but not wanting to run afoul of any ghosts or goblins out there, I suggest that we stay away from Monday. But what is the pleasure of the members of the board for scheduling at least one session next week, possibly two?
Looks like Mr. Jeff and I have a meeting, another hearing of the board on Tuesday night
Right.
on a Granite Avenue.
Wednesday.
I think it's
I meant
Wednesday.
Wednesday. I'm
Yes.
sorry. I'm staring right
Wednesday.
at it and I said the wrong thing. So I guess either Tuesday or Thursday.
My preference would be Tuesdays. Does the board have a preference?
Well, that would normally be my preference. It is All Saints Day. Theoretically, I'm
Right.
supposed to be singing in the choir that night.
Me too.
So to leave open that to leave open that possibility, how are we, would the 3rd be all right?
Thursday,
Alright.
I'm available on Thursday.
That's 3
Oh,
nights
why
out in a row for me, but it's still better
Alright.
than the alternative.
Mr. Mullen, are you available the third?
Yeah, that'll be
All
fine.
right, so
Yeah.
why don't we schedule this the third?
Great.
All right. So why don't we schedule this the third? I would note that the current deadline for the decision to be issued is Tuesday, the 8th.
Yeah.
That also happens to be election day.
Yep.
So I think the board is making good progress, but I think we'll see where we are on Thursday, the 3rd, at the end of the hearing. We may need to see if the applicant is amenable to a slight a week or two extension in order to accomplish getting everything done. But I think that we're this close to
Yeah.
getting done. But I think we be nice to have a buffer, if you will. Plus, I have to tell members of the board that that week, the week of the 7th, I will be out of town for that entire week. That doesn't mean that I can't do a board meeting from my hotel room,
Mhm.
but I would prefer not to, but be that as it may.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm not sure that there's any additional business for the board to consider at this point, other than recessing this particular hearing to Thursday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. Before I make that motion to do so, Mr. Gray or Mr. Mullen, any additional questions or comments or anything you'd like to add to the good of the order?
No,
No, sir.
Okay. Ms. Barrett, anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. Tim, are you all set? All right, I will.
I'm all set. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. All right. Miss Rich, I assume because you didn't object that Thursday, the 3rd is okay from the town's perspective?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you for confirming that.
No problem.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for your time and attention and good work this evening, and looking forward to seeing you next week. And Judy, looking forward to the results of your swim. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everyone again.
All right, good night.
Good
Good night.